Powerful men have tried to break this prophecy. 7 fateful words that seal the future. And our prophecy begins in the Middle East, and particularly in the land that was liberated or invaded, whichever way you want to put it, by America to depose this man, Saddam Hussein. Today, 60 miles, that's about 100 kilometres south of Baghdad, lie the ruins of what was once the greatest city in the whole world. Babylon is believed to have been the first city in history to have attained a population of 1 million people. And its great walls surrounding it. Oh, by the way, Babylon today is a ruin, as I mentioned, but there's an ancient story of a man called Daniel who was thrown into a den of lions. And people may say, well, that's just a fairy story, and there's not much, you can't rely upon ancient stories like that. But an archaeologist, not so long ago, friends, was digging in the ruins of Babylon, and he came across, well, actually, he almost fell into a hole in the ground amongst the ruins. And when he was pulled out, the team looked down in there and they saw this great deep pit. And as they began to excavate the rubble, they came to an inscription like a plaque. They used to put plaques on buildings back in those days too. And the plaque said, "This is the place where those who defied the king were thrown to the wild beasts." Physical, archaeological evidence of an ancient Bible fairy tale. Not so much a fairy tale, friends, but true history, apparently. And in Babylon, we go now to the time when Babylon was at its peak, ruling the world. Magnificent. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the world. Now, Babylon was a glorious kingdom. It was the mistress of the world at the time. And it had great walls around it that went 30 stories high in places. In fact, the walls were so thick, they had a roadway along the top, right round the city, and they were so thick it was like a 4-lane highway. You could race 4 chariots abreast. At an elevation of 300 feet, 100 metres above the ground, all around the city. Incredible. Here is the only surviving portrait of King Nebuchadnezzar, the man who did this. And the story I'm about to tell you tonight begins with this man. This is the man also that came across to the land of Israel at the time the Ark of the Covenant disappeared and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the Jewish temple and took the captives to Babylon. And they were there in captivity in exile for about 70 years. Now, during this time, Nebuchadnezzar had great respect for the princes and nobles of the countries that he conquered, whom he brought as prisoners to his city. And among the young nobles of the land of Judah in Israel was a man called Daniel, and his dreams became very famous. Daniel was a young man captive in Babylon at the time when King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Now, most of us don't go much on dreams, but there is one method with which our Creator can communicate, and sometimes he communicates with chosen people in that way. History has given us examples of that. Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan emperor, had a dream. In the morning, he was troubled when he woke up, but he couldn't remember what it was, but he knew it was something that was important, and it really worried him. So the king summoned the magicians and the enchanters and the sorcerers and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamt. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I have had a dream that troubles me. I want to know what it means." And these men talked among themselves, "What shall we say? I mean, how is he? He's going to find out that we've had this facade all these years, because now he just doesn't give us, ask us to interpret a dream. He tells us also to tell him what he dreamt." That's a bit hard. And they consulted and they said, I'm sorry, king, and if you tell us the dream, we'll give you a meaning for it. But the king got angry. He said, listen, if you think you know so much, then why can't you tell me the dream? If you're in touch with the gods, then you should be able to tell me the whole thing. And he commanded that all the wise men of Babylon would be executed. I mean, that was a pretty harsh penalty, but he was furious that he had been deceived for so long by these men, because now he saw through their charade. And when the execution order was given, other wise men who were captives from other nations were included, including Daniel and 3 of his other friends who were also captive. Now they said, now listen, we don't know what's going on here, but before you get too harsh, Daniel said, I'd like to go and see the king. I mean, Daniel had been honoured enough to be in the royalty area where captive nobles were allowed to live. He said, I want to go and see His Majesty himself. And so Daniel and his 3 friends made this request, and they went before the king. They actually went to the Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, to make the request. They got permission to visit him, and Daniel went before Nebuchadnezzar, and he said, listen, Nebuchadnezzar, there is a God in heaven that reveals secrets. Please give me and my friends a chance to talk to him, and I will come back to you with an answer. Don't kill anybody yet. Please give us this one chance. We believe we can get the answer for you. Nebuchadnezzar actually was impressed by the braveness of these young men. He agreed. So Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his other friends. And he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning the mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Okay, that's what they did. Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king and I'll interpret his dream, said Daniel the next day. An answer had come to him. Daniel was brought before the king, and he said, King Nebuchadnezzar, the sorcerers and the astrologers could not give you your dream and interpret it. But the Creator who made everything and knows everything from beginning to end has agreed to give you the meaning through me. I'm able to give you not only the meaning of the dream, but I'll tell you what you dreamt, and when I tell you, you'll recognize that's so. Now that's really sticking your neck out, isn't it? Daniel had faith in his communion with the Creator that made him. And he said there is a God. He was not going to take any credit to himself. He said there's a God in heaven that reveals secrets and makes known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Right down to the end times of history. Now that's a bold statement to make. Back there, 2,500 years ago. Okay. Here was what Daniel said. You saw in your dream a great statue, and the statue's head was of gold, his chest and arms were of silver, his stomach and his thighs were of brass, and his legs were of iron. You are the head of gold. Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, is represented by the gold in that statue that you saw. And Babylon actually was known as the Golden Kingdom. It was a glittering city. After you there will come another kingdom, a kingdom of brass, inferior to you. And after that will come another kingdom of silver, inferior to you. Then after that a kingdom of brass, and then a kingdom of iron, and then divided kingdoms of partly iron and partly clay. And then a great stone's going to come down and destroy them and take over the whole earth, grind them to powder and take over the whole earth. That's your dream, O king. Now, that's what you saw happening. But now here is the meaning of it. You are the head of gold. Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, is the head of gold. Babylon, friends, is well known not just for hanging gardens, but for the Ishtar Gate, for example. The word Ishtar means woman. We get the English word Easter from it. It was a Babylonian festival, And the captives were brought through here, through these Ishtar gates, and as they walked up through the streets, there were great highways with images of lions on both sides. There were riverways. There was a river going right through the city. There were riverways and canals all around it. And there was enough food grown in the parks and gardens of Babylon to keep 1 million people alive for 20 years if they were besieged. Can you imagine that? No land on earth would dare attack Babylon. It would be useless, be futile, be like throwing a stone at a huge building and expecting the building to fall over. Well, that was Babylon. But there was given a prophecy that it was going to be overthrown by another kingdom. And this kingdom would be inferior, just as silver is inferior to gold. And Daniel actually continued to describe it, and the king got interested because he remembered, yes, I was dreaming about the statue. And the book of Daniel records the event. Very interesting book. And there in the palace of Babylon, the two men talked. The king who had dreamt and the young man who was interpreting the dream. This nation that's inferior is going to take over Babylon. Now that's a most fascinating story of how a nation that was inferior actually overtook Babylon without losing one soldier. One night I think I'm going to tell you that story. It's fascinating. It's absolutely incredible. And Babylon, the nation of gold, was going to be crushed to pieces. Glory of the kingdoms. What happened, friends, that night? I'll tell you a little bit about it now. What happened that night was that Nebuchadnezzar's grandson by marriage, Belshazzar, had a great feast in the city of Babylon. He invited 1,000 of his nobles and his lords and ladies. And even the guards got drunk in the city gates, and they left the gates open. But that was the gates inside the city, not the gates on the outside. But this river that was going through Babylon from the north, and then going down to the Gulf of Persia, flowing through the city, had great gates coming down, like prongs of a fork, down to the riverbed, so no one could walk down even through the riverbed to get under the gates. The river came through, and these big fork-like obstructions blocked the way. But there was a prophecy in the Bible that said, the gates will not be shut. I will open the city through those gates. Now, the interesting thing is that King Cyrus of the Medo-Persian coalition that came against Babylon, when they got to the city, they could see it was hopeless taking it. No way could they take it. So what they did was, Cyrus ordered that they would divert the river upstream. And they began to divert the rivers till the water downstream began to go down to nothing. And there was a dry riverbed. But still, there was a little bit of space there where these fork-like prongs came down near the riverbed. They managed to get under some of those, and they gradually got enough to go inside the city. Now the feast was going on, nobody knew what was happening that night. And they could have come into that riverbed and walked out the other end of the city without ever taking the city, because there were gates all the way through in all the streets. But the prophecy said the gates would be opened, the guards would get drunk, and the gates will not be shut. And that night, friends, the Babylonian nation went to sleep as subjects of the king of Babylon. The next morning they woke up as subjects of the king of Persia. It was as simple as that. It's the only way it could have happened. In that feast that night, there was another strange thing happened. A hand appeared writing some inscription on the wall of the banquet room, and they were all afraid. The king watched the hand. His face turned pale. He was frightened. His knees knocked and his legs gave way. And once again, Daniel was remembered. He was now an old man, old bearded man, and he was asked to come in and explain what was going on here. And he told them